Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our town hall meeting, our monthly town hall meeting for our Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition. My name is Kimberly Limore, and I am on the Executive Steering Committee of the CPMC, and I welcome you on today to our discussion on immigration policies. Today, we are going to welcome David Spicer, who is the Senior Policy Advisor at the USCCB, and also Ingrid Delgado, who is around for questions also from the USCCB. So as always, we start off with prayer. Then I can kind of turn it over to David, and we'll just kind of flow from there. We will have time for questions and answers. If we have a small crowd, of course, you can feel free to chime in and unmute yourself during that time, or you can put your questions in the chat, and we'll make sure we get to them. So again, let's just start off and place ourselves in the presence of God as we pray for this afternoon's session. And I have a prayer for immigrants on today. So let's just start with the name of Father and Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Merciful God, we pray for families and individuals who have left or fled their homes, seeking a safer and a better life. We lift up to you their hopes, their fears, and their needs, that they may be protected on their journeys, their dignity and rights may be honored and upheld, and they may be welcomed with open arms into generous and compassionate communities. We pray all this in the name of your matchless Son's name, Jesus. Amen. Again, thank you for joining us on today. We know the summer is kind of busy and our numbers are kind of low, but this is still important conversations as each of our cities are having a lot of different immigrants coming from all different places from across the world. So we thank you for joining us on today. As I said earlier, we are welcoming David Spicer, the Senior Policy Advisor at the USCCB. And David will tell you more about his background and everything and what he does at USCCB. And so I am going to return it right now over to David.
Thanks so much, Kim. And hello, everyone. It's great to be with you. I'm just going to share my screen real quick so that you can see these slides I have here. There we go. So as Kim just mentioned, we're here to discuss the issue of immigration. And I came up with this sort of just question here: what's happening with immigration in the United States? Very creative, I know, but if I had to come up with kind of the shortest and simplest answer to this question, I would say a lot and nothing all at the same time. Immigration, as I'm sure you're all aware, is very complex, and there are a lot of different stakeholders involved. Certainly the US Congress and the administration play big roles, and then also the courts also have been very active in the area of immigration in recent years. So lots of different cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, and it's resulted in a number of challenges and also a number of opportunities for newcomers and those who welcome them and help them to begin their lives in the United States. So just a little bit about me very quickly. I, as Kim said, serve as the Senior Policy Advisor for Migration and Refugee Services at the USCCB. This is the largest department at the conference. And we are the department that is responsible for advocating on behalf of the churches and specifically the bishops' priorities and positions related to the area of migration. We are provided guidance by the USCCB's Committee on Migration, which is currently chaired by Bishop Mark Seitz of the Diocese of El Paso in Texas. And so in my capacity, I oversee all of the department's policy and advocacy work and work closely with the Committee on Migration and Bishop Seitz, as well as our programmatic offices, the Office of Refugee Resettlement Services, which oversees and administers our programs for refugees and other newcomers in collaboration with the federal government. And then the Office of Children's Services is our office within MRS that administers programs for unaccompanied migrant children and unaccompanied refugee minors. And so I have the pleasure of working closely with them and ensuring that their views and their needs are incorporated into the advocacy that my office and the conference as a whole engages in. So just to begin with kind of a quick rundown of what we'll be discussing. First, kind of what's happening in Congress, followed by what the administration is doing on that side of things, and then just touching on some ongoing efforts to welcome specific populations within the United States, and then finally just how you good folks can get involved with these different efforts and with some of the advocacy that we at the USCCB do in support of newcomers and vulnerable populations. So to start off with what's happening in Congress, immigration reform, of course, is, I'm sure, again, many of you know, is something that the Catholic Church in the United States and the US bishops have been advocating in support of for decades now. The last major reform of the US immigration system was in 1986, and that was a comprehensive bill that focused a lot on things like security and repercussions for those who entered the United States without authorization, but it also provided a pathway to lawful status for those who were in the United States and undocumented at the time, which of course is something that the bishops and the church have also advocated heavily in favor of in the years since and the years leading up to 1986. We did come close to a comprehensive reform in 2013 during the Obama administration. That was a bipartisan effort led by what was known as the Gang of Eight, and it was 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats who came together, and I believe at the time that passed in the Senate, but it ultimately did not pass in the House. And we've had multiple attempts since then, but nothing has quite kind of made it over the necessary threshold of passing in both chambers of Congress and then being signed by the president into law. So we're still sort of in the same place we were in 1986 in terms of the law, with some changes happening since then, kind of on a smaller level. But obviously the overall environment and sort of the ecosystem with which we're faced in terms of immigration has evolved pretty significantly since the 1980s. We did have passage of the American Dream and Promise Act and the Farm Workforce Modernization Act in the House last Congress. Both of these bills were endorsed by the USCCB. The American Dream and Promise Act would provide this pathway to legal status for those we refer to as dreamers, those who were brought to the United States as children and have been here ever since, and many of whom have grown up here and know this is their only country. And then the Farm Workforce Modernization Act would improve the agricultural guest worker program and also provide that same pathway to legal status for undocumented agricultural workers in the United States. Over 50% of our agricultural workforce is comprised of undocumented persons. So that is a significant population of concern for the bishops and for the church overall. The 118th Congress, which we're in now, began in January. So we now have a split in leadership between the House and the Senate. The Republican Party controls the House and the Democratic Party controls the Senate. So we do have a split there. And of course, the president is a member of the Democratic Party. So also a split there between the House and the White House. So that is challenging in terms of getting things passed through Congress. And even last Congress, when we had Democratic majorities in both chambers, the filibuster and the need for at least 10 Republican votes, along with all Democratic votes in the Senate at the time, still requires a certain level of bipartisan support and bipartisan cooperation. So that's another area where the USCCB and the church is always working to sort of support and motivate, is that kind of bipartisan dialogue and in theory, bipartisan sort of progress toward the reform that we're looking to see. The real sort of effort that has been undertaken, at least on the House side, since the start of this Congress, has been the Secure the Border Act, HR 2. This was a pretty large Republican proposal that mainly focused on increasing enforcement measures and restricting access to humanitarian protection like asylum, especially along the US-Mexico border. It was strongly opposed by the USCCB, and that link there will take you to a letter that Bishop Sight sent on behalf of the Committee on Migration opposing that bill. And unlike many of our letters, it was actually fairly detailed in terms of the sorts of provisions that were problematic from the perspective of the church. So if you're interested in learning more about that and sort of what the USCCB was especially concerned about, you're able to see that from that letter. The bill did pass in the House entirely along partisan lines. I think 2 Republicans voted against the bill, and otherwise all of the Republicans in the House voted in favor of its passage. Some of the things that it would do are listed here. It would have, or would, if it were enacted into law, significantly reduce protections for unaccompanied children, effectively end access to asylum as we know it at the US-Mexico border, mandate detention, including for families and children. And in the case of children, right now they are required to be transferred to the care of the Office of Refugee Resettlement within a period of time. But then this bill would actually allow for an indefinite detention of those children by the Department of Homeland Security, so sort of overriding the current protections. And then restricting access to legal employment access for those who are seeking asylum. And then something that is noteworthy, especially from our perspective as the church and as a provider of services for newcomers, it would actually limit the Department of Homeland Security's ability to partner with non-governmental organizations such as Catholic Charities or others in serving newcomers. So these are all things that HR 2 would do. And again, it was strongly opposed by the USCCB as well as many others. And it ultimately passed in the House. It is unlikely to go anywhere in the Senate, but the precedent of its passage in the House is still there. More recently, we've had the reintroduction of the Dignity Act. And this is probably the best example of a good faith bipartisan effort we have right now, with 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats in the House co-sponsoring the bill, which is a pretty commendable feat to get that many Republicans and Democrats on an immigration-related bill in this political climate. I won't go through kind of the details of the bill. We will have an explainer of the bill coming out tomorrow, but it focuses on enhancing border security with increased resources and penalties in relation to that, but then it also provides opportunities for undocumented persons to regularize their status in the United States, and it increases opportunities for employment-based immigration and reducing the backlog for visas for those seeking to immigrate to the United States, not only employment-based visas, but family-based visas as well. The USCCB at this point does not have an official position on the bill, although the conference certainly welcomes it for the good faith bipartisan effort it is, and will continue to engage with the co-sponsors and anyone else, frankly, who's interested in kind of meaningful improvements to the immigration system, and this is a good start for those conversations. The road ahead for the bill is very difficult, even with the 6 Republican co-sponsors, simply because Speaker McCarthy, who of course is the Republican leader in the House. He's technically not the Republican leader, which is a different person, but he sort of calls the shots in the House, and he would ultimately have kind of the singular ability to either move forward with the bill or keep it from going to the floor for a vote. And so just kind of that position that he's in and that power that he wields is pretty significant. And it's not necessarily the same case in the Senate, but a companion hasn't yet been introduced in the Senate for this bill. So that's also something important to note. So that's where we are in terms of that. We can move on now to what the administration is doing and some of its ongoing priorities, it is really focused on increasing the capacity of the U.S. refugee admissions program with the goal of reaching 125,000 annual refugee admissions. That goal is the same goal that the administration has been working with for a couple of years now, but because the prior administration reduced the refugee admissions goal to 15,000 at the lowest point toward the end of the previous administration, it has taken a significant amount of time and resources and sort of collaboration between the different stakeholders to get back to the level of being able to reach 125,000 refugee arrivals in a single year. The USCCB, for those who don't know, is one of the 10 national resettlement agencies in the United States. So we partner primarily with Catholic charities agencies around the country who actually receive refugees in their communities after they've been processed by the federal government and granted refugee status as part of that process. Something else that the administration is focused on is preserving and fortifying the DACA program, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that was put in place by the Obama administration. That program has been the subject of litigation now for a number of years, and it continues to be litigated. And any day now we could get a decision from the federal district court that is considering a regulation that the administration promulgated to preserve that program. And the expectation is that the judge will continue to rule after already having ruled previously that the program is an unlawful use of the president's authority. And so it'll then almost certainly be appealed by the Biden administration to the appellate court, and then from there, likely all the way up to the Supreme Court. So that process could take another year or a couple of years to work all the way up to the Supreme Court and be fully adjudicated. So we're keeping a close eye on that. Last month, the administration ended the policy known as Title 42, which was put in place toward the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and allowed the executive branch to rapidly expel migrants and those seeking asylum in particular from the United States after entering, or to refuse them entry at a port of entry along the border in particular. And that policy was ended last month. And I have some slides right after this that will talk a little bit about sort of the conditions since then. The expediting of asylum claims and their adjudication is also something that the administration is focused on, partially in relation to the high numbers of arrivals at the US-Mexico border, and then increasing the number of removal flights, essentially deportation flights, for those who are found not to have a basis to remain in the United States. And then heavily relying on what's known as humanitarian parole, and we'll touch on that in just a moment, what that is. And then increasing opportunities through humanitarian parole for folks to enter into the United States with a legal status or legal presence. And then finally, just reducing the general processing backlogs that are impacting kind of the full range of immigration benefits that are provided to newcomers. And this also includes, just as a particular kind of Catholic matter of importance, foreign-born religious workers, priests, women religious, and others whom the church relies upon for the ministries that they provide in the United States, and especially in more remote or rural regions where there's a lack of domestic or US born religious workers to fill the ministries that are vacant otherwise. So big issue is the processing backlogs, and then just the visa limitations that exist for those folks and for the organizations, not only the Catholic Church, but other denominations and traditions that rely on those religious workers. Additional programs here, just a quick list of some things the Department of State announced earlier this year, something that it's calling the Welcome Corps, which allows everyday Americans to privately sponsor refugees as part of the refugee admissions program. So that is very much underway. It's in its first phase, which is using or providing the opportunity to be privately resettled to refugees who are already in that process. And then the second phase will allow those same Americans or US-based persons to name those that they would like to sponsor as part of the refugee admissions process. And those folks would still have to qualify as refugees under US immigration law, but it effectively would allow private individuals to take the role of these national resettlement agencies, such as the USCCB and their local partners, with the caveat that it's always added on to whatever capacity these national organizations and their local agencies can provide. So it's not meant to replace the current system as it exists, but to expand and to grow our capacity to receive refugees. And then the administration is also very recently establishing safe mobility offices throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. And these are basically regional processing centers that are available to those who would otherwise migrate to the US-Mexico border, but helping them to understand what pathways may be available to them wherever they are, and to help them to avoid the often perilous journey to the United States border, and then perhaps also to face the sort of the end of being removed from the country or sent back to their country of origin. And so that is something that's really being emphasized by the administration right now, is just the ability to sort of seek that protection from further south of the US-Mexico border. And then finally, just designating, redesignating, and extending temporary protected status for certain countries experiencing in-country conditions as described by the statute relating to TPS. And so a number of countries have these designations, including Ukraine, Sudan, South Sudan, Haiti, Cuba, I think Cuba, actually, not Cuba, sorry, but a number of countries have this designation, and it allows the nationals of those countries to remain lawfully in the United States for the duration of that TPS designation. And so we have, in some cases, people who have been in the United States on TPS for 2 decades or more because the conditions remain ongoing in their countries of origin. And so it's not really safe or possible for them to return. And of course, in many cases, they've established lives here in the United States. So these are also one of the populations that the conference and the church advocates in support of getting a pathway to permanent legal status in the United States. Just to touch quickly on the situation at the US-Mexico border, especially since the end of Title 42, the total number of encounters by Customs and Border Patrol, or Customs and Border Protection, sorry, is what that should be, along the entire US-Mexico border is relatively lower and more stable than expected. Right up until the end of Title 42, there was actually an increase in the number of encounters. And then since the end of Title 42, the number of encounters has been much lower than expected. And that's probably attributable in large part to the increased penalties that come with the regular immigration laws versus the way Title 42 worked, which was just sort of expelling people as quickly as possible from the country. And then at that point, they could, especially if they were expelled to the region of northern Mexico, just cross back into the United States to seek asylum. And so Title 8 of the US Code, which is kind of the part of the US immigration law with our regular kind of immigration processes, that does impose certain penalties for those who unlawfully enter the United States or enter the country without authorization. And so that is one disincentive. And then of course, these programs that I just mentioned and the initiatives that I just mentioned are also incentivizing people to turn to those in place of entering the country without authorization. Total encounters, as you can see here, has actually gone down from April as of May, so down to 169,000 across the full length of the US-Mexico border. And then this is also down quite a bit from about a year ago when that number was 239 total encounters. So these are families as well as individuals and children traveling by themselves. And then still significant numbers of Venezuelans, Mexicans, and Central Americans are being encountered along the US-Mexico border. And then, as I mentioned, there's an uptick in removal flights, including the deportation flights to Cuba starting for the first time since the pandemic started in 2021, 2020. And then the grim conditions in many places along the Mexican side of the border have been exacerbated by the larger numbers of people who are congregating there rather than being processed into the United States. Just a quick view, especially for the folks here of the immigration detention situation. You can see that the numbers have kind of been all over the place, but they've really averaged or they've been kept in between 31,000 and 21,000 for the past year. Before the start of the pandemic, the monthly detention numbers, of course, that was a different administration as well, were exceeding 50,000 people pretty regularly per month as far as the average number of people detained. And so that is also a change. And then here you just see the states with the greatest number of detainees, with Texas being in the first spot, and then with a pretty significant decrease, but then followed by Louisiana, California, Georgia, and Arizona, which have a more similar number of people. As of June 16th, all of the ICE detention facilities throughout the country have been open for visitation, with the exception of those 3 there. During the pandemic, there were policies put in place to limit visitation to detention centers, and those have largely been lifted. And then as of June 3rd, over 220,000 people were actively in immigration and customs enforcement alternatives to detention. And these are things like ankle monitors or case management that allow people to pursue their immigration cases outside of a detention center. And so this is something, another sort of program or approach that the conference has advocated in support of, allowing people to, if they have employment authorization, to work to support themselves and their families while their cases are pending before the immigration courts. And the average right now for an immigration case, for a defensive asylum case, is about 5 years. So certainly preferable that those folks be able to pursue those cases and also have better access to legal counsel in the communities in which they live, and have family and friends and can contribute rather than in detention centers, as many of you know well. And then just finally, some of the efforts to welcome specific populations over the past year or so. First, we have Afghans, and of course, this began really in 2021 with the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. The primary population we're talking about was over 70,000 Afghans, and most of them received that status or that benefit, really, I mentioned earlier, humanitarian parole. And due to that, they don't actually have permanent protection in the United States. They don't have refugee status. So it's a tricky situation to be in, because that humanitarian parole is limited for a certain period of time. It was just announced that they could get re-parole by applying for that with the Department of Homeland Security, but that's only for another 2 years. And so the USCCB has been among those strongly advocating for an Afghan Adjustment Act to provide that pathway to permanent status and safety in the United States. Of course, the reception of these Afghans, because of the short period of time in which it occurred, wouldn't have been possible without really strong support from American communities, and especially those within the veteran community in the United States have been very passionate about this population. This is just a slide kind of going through the distinctions between humanitarian parole and refugee status, for example, usually, again, granted for no more than 2 years. Those who receive parole are eligible to apply for work authorization, but unlike those with refugee status, it's not automatic that they get to work in general. So that is something that takes time. And then, like I said, no direct pathway to permanent legal status. So very different from refugee status in those ways. Ukrainians, obviously another population of significant relevance with the ongoing war in Ukraine. And shortly after the war, in April of 2022, the administration announced the creation of Uniting for Ukraine, which is a program, sort of private sponsorship, although it's not really sponsorship. It relies on humanitarian parole, and it requires that a US-based financial supporter be able to vouch for the Ukrainian individual or families for the duration of their parole period. And so that program is ongoing, and it's been very well utilized in terms of the numbers. Over 250,000 individuals have applied, and over 130,000 have arrived in the United States since being accepted, and those numbers continue to increase week to week. So with no end in sight, unfortunately, for now, for the war in Ukraine, it's likely that this program will continue to be utilized for the foreseeable future. And then just to touch on Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, each of these nationalities has also been provided a humanitarian parole process, similarly requiring the same US-based sponsor, although there are some distinctions in terms of
it is capped at 30,000 potential beneficiaries per month between all 4 nationalities, which is not the case for Uniting for Ukraine. And then there is the potential for this to be expanded to other nationalities, but it is important to note that the program itself is being litigated, it's being challenged in the courts. So it's possible that the program may not continue to be available, but that is contingent on how the litigation goes. So more to be determined there. These are some of the challenges that we see with these parole populations, in particular housing. Of course, we have a lack of affordable housing across the country, and this impacts not only non-citizens but citizens as well. And so that's something that we face. Access to legal employment continues to be an issue, just because the process can take quite a while, given the processing backlogs. And then on the issue of backlogs and the lack of long-term legal status, you see here just some figures in terms of the cases that are pending and the average number of years that it takes. I said 5 earlier, and it's over 4. And then just in terms of those who are entering the country on visas, those individuals and their sponsors continue to grapple with the significant processing backlogs as well. Affordable legal representation, there just aren't enough lawyers practicing immigration law who are providing it at low cost or no cost for those newcomers who are in need of it. So that's something that the church has worked on, but it continues to be a challenge. And then varying access to public benefits. Humanitarian parolees generally don't have any sort of access to federally funded benefits and services, so they don't have those supports to rely on, generally speaking. And then how folks can get involved with welcoming newcomers, you all in particular. The USCCB has what's known as the POWER program, and this program has been around since, I think, 2010, if I remember correctly. But it is parishes organized to welcome immigrants and refugees, and so it really leverages the goodwill and the solidarity of Catholics across the country and others, not just Catholics, but especially Catholics, to support newcomers. And so this is a program that the USCCB is proud of and works closely with Catholic charities to implement. And then our Welcome Circle program is designed for those humanitarian parolees that I mentioned, specifically the Ukrainians, Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. And so that is a fairly recent program that is continuing to grow and to be expanded. And so we're proud of that. And then Welcome Corps is just kind of the one-stop shop for kind of privately sponsored refugees, which I mentioned earlier. You have the Catholic Charities directory there. So many Catholic Charities agencies welcome volunteers to assist with their migration ministries. And then welcome.us is sort of a clearinghouse for a lot of these same things that I've mentioned, as well as some other opportunities to get engaged. And then on the issue of advocacy, the USCCB, as many of you probably know, has its Justice for Immigrants campaign. And if you have not already, I would welcome you to visit the JFI website listed there and to sign up for updates. And earlier I noted that we'll have an explainer on the Dignity Act coming out soon, and that's how that will be distributed. And then the USCCB's Action Center is also kind of our overarching place to engage on not only migration related issues, but the full range of issues that the USCCB advocates in support of. Or in opposition to, I should say. And then the specific migration-related legislative advocacy priorities that we kind of have right now top of mind are listed there, and I won't go through all of them, and I've already promised to share the slides with you all, so you can always reference the things that are listed at a later time, but those are kind of the things that we're really focused on right now, and you'll see just in terms of the Afghan Adjustment Act, that would address the issues I've mentioned with Afghans not being able to stay in the United States permanently, or not having that permanent protection and certainty. So that's something that's certainly a focus and a bipartisan effort to boot, and also something that we have a lot of great collaboration with others on, including, as I mentioned earlier, veterans organizations and veterans across the country. So that is all from me. I have here just the sign up for the JFI biweekly review, which is the biweekly email and newsletter with a lot of updates about what we're working on and just things to be aware of and opportunities for advocacy. So I would encourage folks to sign up for that again if you haven't already, and happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for David right now?
If I can pipe up and ask, I don't know how to phrase this. Yeah, I know this is a effort for the USCCB, but I'm not sure all the bishops are quite on board. I'm up in the Great North, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Milwaukee has a significant Hispanic population. I know, not everybody is documented. We did have quite a bit of the Afghan resettlement program. One of the reserve bases in the state was one of the original receiving points. But we don't hear about this issue. It's not something that seems to be on the of particular interest to our Archbishop. What do we do when we have people in need and people who are interested, but the Archbishop isn't interested? He has other things on his list, shall we say. What do we do?
Actually, this is a question that I get a lot, and I will say, of course, I do work for the bishops, so you're all aware of that.
Yeah, you have to be politically correct, I know.
Well, sure. I guess to be fair, the issue of immigration, is a federal issue, or it has primarily always been a federal issue throughout the history of the country, at least in terms of the law and the policy involved. And so even in terms of your state Catholic conferences, many of them have understandably always deferred to the USCCB to engage on the issue, just because one of the complexity, and also because of the sort of the need to engage with members of Congress and with the executive branch specifically. And so that is something that has actually begun to change a bit in recent years. At the state level, we've seen kind of an increasing interest of state governments in the issue of immigration. In some cases, it's kind of more negative, and in some cases, it's more neutral, related to things like the need for more workers and sort of lack of or labor shortages. And then on the more positive front, you have, states who are trying to provide in-state tuition to dreamers and others. So a lot of that is now going on at the state level, as Ingrid, for example, well knows, coming from the Florida Catholic Conference. As far as getting your local bishop to be kind of more engaged on the issue, or more supportive, if it's the case that perhaps he hasn't been as supportive as we would hope. I would say that, it's not always just the local bishop, but certainly if you have a Catholic Charities, which does a lot of the legwork, both in serving people and in advocating, and then also the State Catholic Conference. Again, it's maybe not necessarily the case that the state conference isn't supportive, but perhaps just doesn't have as much engagement or experience with these issues, and so don't hesitate to reach out and to kind of encourage your state conferences and your Catholic Charities, especially if your Catholic Charities doesn't already have programming for newcomers. Certainly something that you can encourage them to be better about.
Right, thank you. And Kevin Fitzpatrick mentioned that, in all fairness, Archbishop Virgilio made a powerful statement on immigration at the conference. So yeah, there are some that are just, all on board and are making statements and are definitely jumping in and helping in the situation. So we appreciate those bishops that are doing that. Karen had a couple of questions. She said, are there needed stories which ministers can provide to their legislatures, and any creative ways we can promote or increase awareness of these issues? It is hard to keep up through the media, and sometimes those things get lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions. In terms of the impact stories, I mean, really one of the greatest things we can do is sort of lift up the voices of those who have been directly impacted. So if any of you do get meetings with either your member of Congress or senators, your representative or senators' offices, either their local offices or their national offices here in Washington, I would encourage you to incorporate into those meetings newcomers. I've been in many meetings with DACA recipients and other dreamers, with Afghans and Ukrainians and so many others, and they really do kind of serve as sort of the best advocates for the work that we're doing. So I think just to the extent that you can kind of include them in your efforts directly is a great way to lift up their stories and their hopes and aspirations, and also the contributions that they make, on a daily basis to our communities and to our country. And then as far as I think the other question, Kim, was how to keep up and how to engage. Is that right?
Yeah, any creative ways we can promote or increase awareness of the issues.
Sure. So, the couple of recommendations I already gave as far as keeping abreast of the updates from the Justice for Immigrants campaign of the USCCB. So that's, more targeted toward these migration-related issues and opportunities for action. The USCCB, as many of you probably know, has the annual Catholic Social Ministry Gathering. And there won't be one next year because of the Eucharistic Congress or the Eucharistic Revival, but there will be the next Catholic Social Ministry Gathering in January of 2025. And so you have time to plan to come to Washington. It would be great to have you. And then during that, it's an opportunity to advocate usually for one migration-related issue, one international issue, and one domestic issue, sort of in the light of Catholic teaching and the needs of the vulnerable and those who rely upon our advocacy. So that's also just a concrete way that you could be involved. And then I guess the last thing, just to kind of keep informed, there are a number of Catholic organizations out there that really do provide a lot of helpful resources and information on this topic. And just besides the USCCB, you have Catholic Relief Services, Catholic Charities USA, and Clinic, the Catholic Legal Immigration Network. And all three of those, they're all sister agencies of the USCCB, and very tremendous work that they do and information that they provide to both Catholics and non-Catholics alike who are interested in sort of the church's approach and what the church is doing in this area.
Okay, Dave. I don't have any other questions, but I have one question.
Okay.
It's like here in Chicago, we have a lot of immigrants coming in. A lot of them have been staying in our police stations. Now they're moving them to our colleges for the summer. And how can we help to protect their human dignity?
This is a question that we grapple with, sort of continuously, and I don't have, unfortunately, a clear-cut answer. The work that Catholic charities often do is helping people to navigate the expectations that are placed upon them by the U.S. immigration system. So to navigate their immigration court cases, to find dignified housing and employment opportunities, and to get the authorization to be able to work. And so I think just doing what you can to volunteer with those sorts of organizations. It's certainly not just Catholic charities. Many of our fellow people of faith have similar services or initiatives that they engage in, and so I think participating in those, kind of helping people with the more practical issues that they encounter, because as many of you, I'm sure, can sort of appreciate, when newcomers arrive in the United States, and especially those who don't come with refugee status or a lot of the supports that refugees and other more formal humanitarian populations receive, it's just difficult to sort of get your feet on the ground and to know, where to enroll your children in school and to learn English. I mean, this is something that people can help with, without having a lot of expertise or a lot of experience. I mean, all of you, I think, probably speak English. And so it's something that you can assist with. And so these more practical things, I think, and these are things that the church and Catholics have done for generations in this country. I mean, dating all the way back to the 1700s, Catholics have just been there to provide people a warm welcome and to help them get their feet on the ground and to navigate their new communities. So I would just encourage you all, to the extent that you can, just as part of the regular course of sharing your time, talent, and treasures as Catholics, to find those more practical opportunities to provide solidarity. So, and the programs that I mentioned, the USCCB Welcome Circle program and the Power program are two great options for that.
Great. Well, thank you, David. We sure appreciate all this information that you've given us on today. And there are so many things that we can do as individuals to continue to assist and help and be welcoming to people that come into our country and our cities and our states. Again, I thank you for joining us on today. Be blessed.